Howdy, folks. Thanks for checking into Mr. Ulrich's Land of Biology. I am Mr. Ulrich. In this notescast, we're actually going to be talking about how matter and energy flow through ecosystems. And you might be asking yourself, why am I looking at a carrot? Well, one of the things that we have to answer is, why do carrot plants actually make carrots? What's the purpose of that delicious orange, or sometimes purple or yellow, depending on where you get them? Why do they make those things? Is it just for us to eat? Us humans can be pretty anthropocentric in thinking that all things are really orchestrated around our needs and what we want, that the whole entire universe kind of revolves around us. Before we get too much further into carrots and why there are carrots, we need to discuss why we're eating. So here's the center of my universe. This is Bruce at 8 pounds, fresh out of the oven. And if he's going to make it from 8 pounds to the 68 pounds that he is in this picture, he's a few more pounds now, he's going to need some matter. He's going to need some material to make more of him from. And he's going to get that from, among other things, carrots. He does like carrots. But we eat from more than just the material that we need to grow and repair. Food is also fuel. So in order to run around and play soccer and metabolize, Bruce and I, we're all going to eat some food and use that as fuel to convert it into ATP, which we can then use to power our cells. Now I think we're ready to start to answer that question of why carrots. Why do carrot plants bother making carrots? Remember, carrots, of course, are autotrophs. And so they're going to use the sun's energy, and rather than food energy, in order to synthesize molecules, which they'll then use for fuel. All right, so through photosynthesis, they take the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen from water, and they put that all together, and they synthesize the glucose, which they then use to make more of themselves. Now, here's where the carrots come in. Though they don't have brains, the carrot kind of plans ahead for a time when maybe there aren't enough leaves around. Maybe something came by and ate the leaves. It's not going to die. What it does is it actually produces more glucose than it needs at any given time, and it stores that excess glucose in the form of starch down in its roots as kind of like a rainy day fund, so like when it needs it, right, in an emergency situation. Now, we do the same thing with excess amounts of calories, of fuel molecules that we have. Our bodies put it together into a rainy day fun. And let's not demonize ice cream. A good treat is good every once in a while. Keep it a treat. If you eat too much of just regular old food, you're going to end up with, storing that excess energy for a rainy day. And this would be a perfect time to talk about food chains. Now, I know this isn't the first time we've discussed food chains, so we'll just review it real quick here. Remember, food chains trace the passage of energy through ecosystems as it goes from one individual to another. So the source of all energy in an ecosystem is ultimately the sun. In that the sun is what is powering those autotrophs, in this case, the carrot plant, right? And then somebody's going to come along and eat the carrot. And then the energy that went into the carrot from the sun is now being transferred through eating into the rabbit. And then something else comes along and eats the rabbit. And the energy that's tied up in the rabbit, that the rabbit got from the carrot, that the carrot got from the sun, is ultimately passed on. Right, and so the arrows in a food chain follow the passage of that energy. Now, in this food chain, this sets up the carrots as being what we call the producer, because they're producing the fuel molecules that are not necessarily by themselves going to be passed through, but the chemical energy is going to be passed through. They take the light energy and convert that into chemical energy. The first organisms that consume that energy that's been kind of turned into chemical energy are the primary consumers. You know them as herbivores. And then the organisms that come by and and eat the herbivores are called secondary consumers. You know them as carnivores. Remember, humans as omnivores can be both herbivorous and carnivorous. So just because you're in one, what we call trophic level, doesn't mean that in our case, you can't end up in a different trophic level. Now, rabbits don't do a whole lot of eating of meat. They're not adapted for meat eating, so they're not really omnivorous. So they're kind of stuck in this trophic level, but not all organisms are. I'm confident you see how limited a food chain is when we're talking about the passage of energy through an ecosystem. And a food web is certainly much more complete. Even this food web, though it's very nice, is missing some arrows. I know that foxes don't only eat rabbits, they eat mice as well, so that should be included in there. But as far as energy flow through an ecosystem, what are some other things that are missing from this food web? If you notice that there isn't an energy source, it's not included. Typically, we don't include the energy source. It's just understood that the producers, in this case, carrots, grasses, and grains, are all going to get their energy from the sun. So they're not really needed in the food web. It's understood. Also, what's eating the foxes? What's eating the owls? What happens to their biomass as they go through their life cycle and eventually die? So another thing that's missing from this are those decomposers that are going to break down the foxes that die and the owls that die. Heck, they're going to break down the birds that aren't eaten and the grasshoppers that aren't eaten and the mice that aren't eaten and all of those other things that aren't eaten and die. Something's going to happen to them and they're going to be eaten. So if we want to put in all of the passage of energy, right, we have to include those decomposers as well. So the owls will go there, as well as all of the other arrows that we need to draw. This just gets too messy, and we know that they're going to be there, so we tend to drop the decomposers out of food webs, as well as the sun. Oftentimes, a pyramid is used to model the flow of energy and biomass, for that matter, through an ecosystem, with the producers, in the case of our food chain, the carrots, being kind of the basis of the chain, and then those organisms that consume the producers, the primary consumers, or herbivores like the rabbits, being the next level up, the next trophic level. And so the following trophic level would be the secondary consumers, and so on, whatever eats those secondary consumers. The use of this pyramid shape is more than metaphorical. It's not just that producers form the basis of the food pyramid, I guess, as we go up the trophic levels. It's also that the bottom of the pyramid, that lowest trophic level, has the most material. And indeed, when we start looking at the amount of material that's out there in an ecosystem, most of it is going to be in producers. Here's a snapshot of an ecosystem right outside my back window. Right, I just took this picture the other day. If we were going to try to count up or just estimate the amount of material, living material, which trophic level has the most living material, it's going to be those producers, right? All those plants, the trees, and all the other shrubs and stuff. Bruce, being a different trophic level because he's not a producer, is insignificant, really, compared to the amount of mass of the trees and stuff. And you might say, but yeah, but Bruce isn't part of that ecosystem as far as the transfer of energy. Remember, I make maple syrup, and Bruce is about to run into one of my primary sugar trees there. He's actually running past it. And so some of the energy from the sun that was fixed by the maple tree is put onto Bruce's pancakes in the morning and becomes part of him. And so there's part of a food chain. You might say, well, what else? Hopefully you recognize that there's going to be other living things out there in that picture that are too small for us to see. Things that are going to eat the trees, being primary consumers, and other things that are out there that are going to feed on Bruce. This is a tick. This is a dog tick, Dermacentor variabilis, that I actually got off of Tracy. Didn't bite her or anything. And this isn't the kind that carries Lyme disease. They instead carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tularemia and a host of other fun things. But I didn't bite her or anything. But they're out there, and they could be feeding on Bruce. There are secondary consumers out there. In fact, there are also tertiary consumers, thankfully, and I hear them all the time. There are possum around, and possum are great eaters of ticks. They eat lots of ticks, so a lot of the energy goes there. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but I know the ticks are probably there, but I can't see any possum in there. And if I think about this over a period of time, right, over time, if I put time into the factor, Bruce is going to run out of the picture. So he's only there for a short period of time. The ticks are going to be there for a while, but they don't weigh anything. The possum is only there for a short period of time as well. Probably spends even less time out in the yard than Bruce does. And so when we start thinking about the time factor that's involved and we start putting that into our biomass, right, most of the material that's in this picture is going to be primary producer. And then the amount of primary consumer that can be supported, right, the amount of Bruce that's supported by maple syrup, which is an infinitesimally small amount. But all of the other caterpillars out there, weigh all those up, they're going to be a really small part. And then the amount of things that can survive off of those, right, the amount of secondary consumers like ticks and stuff like that are going to be even smaller, right? And think about the amount of ticks that a possum has to eat in order to be able to survive. And so only a fraction of a possum can be supported by the amount of ticks that are visible in this picture at any given time. This skewing of the biomass pyramid towards the producers has to do with what's called trophic inefficiency. And at least it's one way of explaining why that takes place. You can think of it this way. The sun gives off a lot of energy, and most of that energy is not picked up by plants. And even of the energy that's picked up by the plants, most of that is not actually converted into either ATP or glucose. Most of that is actually inefficient, lost to heat. So only about 10% will say, it's probably a lot less than that, of the energy that is given off by the sun that's absorbed by the plant is actually converted into plant material itself. The rest of that is actually given off in the form of heat by the plant. Now, what do we mean by this? We don't think of plants as being hot, though there are some thermogenic plants, and that's a bit of a different deal. Plants are going through photosynthesis to make ATP, and that ATP gets used up. So not all of the energy is actually converted into plant material itself. Most of it is used for metabolism. The only energy that is available for the next trophic level is the energy that has been stored in the material that makes up the plant itself, because that is what the rabbit is going to come by and eat. So as the rabbit gets the energy from the producers, remember, the producers have used 90% of the energy that they have absorbed for their own uses and metabolism. So only about 10% of that original energy is available for the rabbits. So I can't support as many rabbits mass-wise as I have carrots. There have to be way more carrots than there are rabbits. And so the rabbits are going to run, hop, skip, jump, and play and do rabbity things. They're pretty warm. And so they're going to use up most of the energy that they got from the carrots for their own metabolism. 90% of it, only 10% of it about is available for the next trophic level. And of course, I'm going to use most of that for for my own metabolic needs. Only some of the material, about 10% of the material that I eat from the rabbit, is going to be used to build more of me. The rest of it is going to be respired and converted into heat. Here's the deal. Remember, energy is a flow-through thing when it comes to ecosystems. It comes in from the sun and it radiates out in the form of heat out into space. Matter is recycled over and over and over and over again. And this is where those decomposers are going to come in. They're going to take the rest of that biomass and convert it back into carbon dioxide and water into the atmosphere and heat and decomposers, which then eat themselves and all kinds of fun stuff. So because of this transfer of just 10% of the energy from one trophic level to the next, we call this the 10% rule. It's not a rule because it's not exactly 10%. There are different organisms that are more efficient than others, but it's a good rule to use in quoting marks. When we look at the energy pyramid, we can now include not just one organism at each trophic level, but we can include all of the organisms of a particular trophic level. So all of the producers and all of the consumers and all primary consumers, all the secondary consumers. Now, the problem that we run into with this when people start to look at these is it makes it seem like the producers have more calories than the primary consumers do. And when we look at the whole, all of them in total, yeah, there are more producers and they make up more biomass, and that's where the calories are, is in the mass. Right, so they're going to, as a group, yes, but as individuals, a pound of producers has far less energy in it than a pound of consumers, because the consumers are animals, and animals have a lot more fat and a lot more concentrated energy in them, rather than the carbohydrates that we're going to find mostly in the producers. Some energy pyramid diagrams will include the energy lost at each level. Remember, it's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily lost, because it does represent the energy that was picked up by one trophic level and then used for its metabolism. As it used it for its metabolism, the energy was converted into heat and dissipated. So it was lost from the ecosystem, but not wasted, I guess, is where I would go with that. Well, that took a lot longer than I wanted it to take. I'm confident that I have given you a whole bunch of questions to do on Castle Learning, so check those out. I also have this one question that I want you to try to answer here right in Google Classroom, and that's why vegetarianism. If everyone on the planet became a vegetarian and stopped eating meat products, how might the switch to universal vegetarianism address global food shortages? And of course, I want your answer to reference and use this concept of the energy and biomass pyramids. Please, I'm not trying to convert anyone from being a omnivore. I like bacon on just about everything, so I, of course, am an omnivore myself. I live with a vegetarian, so I kind of get that as well. I've been a vegetarian in the past. But again, I'm not trying to convert anyone. It's really just a matter of you should be an informed consumer. Other than that, if you have any questions, please, please, please ask them in Google Classroom. Drop me an email, any of that good stuff. If you're watching this on YouTube, drop it in the comment section, and I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. Other than that, I miss you all horribly. Obviously, we're not going to see you again this year. Hopefully, I'll see you over the summer. Driving by in town or something, say, hey, Mr. Ulrich. Other than that, we'll see you around.